In the violent days of the 1930s, America was facing a wave of crime unlike anything the country had seen before. Bank robbers, kidnappers, and ruthless gangsters dominated newspaper headlines. But one man would soon become the face of the fight against them. His name was Melvin Purvis. Purvis was born in South Carolina in 1903. He was not physically intimidating. In fact, he stood only 5 feet 4 inches tall. But what he lacked in size, he made up for with determination, intelligence, and fearless ambition. After studying law, he joined the rapidly growing Federal Bureau of Investigation. At that time, the FBI was still developing into a national force capable of fighting organized crime. The United States was deep in the Great Depression, and criminals were exploiting the chaos. Bank robbers crossed state lines, and local police struggled to stop them. The government needed agents who could think strategically and act decisively. Melvin Purvis quickly proved he was one of those agents. Within a few years, his name would become known across the entire country, and he would soon lead the hunt for some of the most dangerous criminals in American history. During the early 1930s, America experienced a massive crime wave. The Great Depression had left millions unemployed and desperate. Banks were collapsing, and many people had lost their life savings. In this chaotic environment, a new kind of criminal rose to fame. Bank robbers traveled from state to state, robbing banks in broad daylight and escaping before police could react. Some criminals even became strange folk heroes to the public. Among the most infamous were John Dillinger, Babyface, Nelson, and Pretty Boy Floyd. Newspapers printed their photos and told dramatic stories about their robberies. But behind the headlines, these men were extremely dangerous. They carried automatic weapons and were responsible for the deaths of many police officers and civilians. Local police departments struggled to catch them because criminals could easily escape across state lines. That meant federal agents had to step in. The FBI began organizing national investigations to hunt these criminals down, and one agent would soon stand at the center of that effort. His name was Melvin Purvis. By 1934, one criminal had become the most wanted man in America. His name was John Dillinger. He had robbed numerous banks and repeatedly escaped from police custody. His daring escapes embarrassed law enforcement and fascinated the public. The FBI needed a leader who could organize a serious manhunt. They chose Melvin Purvis. Purvis was assigned to lead the FBI office in Chicago, which was right in the middle of Dillinger's territory. From there, he began coordinating a nationwide effort to track the famous outlaw. Purvis studied Dillinger carefully. He analyzed his movements, his habits, and the people who helped him hide. Instead of relying only on force, Purvis focused on intelligence gathering and coordination between agencies. The search became a tense game of cat and mouse. Dillinger constantly changed locations and used fake identities to avoid capture. But Purvis was slowly tightening the net. The manhunt was approaching its final chapter, and it would end outside a movie theater in Chicago. On July 22, 1934, the long hunt for John Dillinger finally reached its climax. The FBI received information from an informant that Dillinger planned to watch a movie at the Biograph Theater in Chicago. Melvin Purvis quickly organized a plan. Agents surrounded the theater while blending into the crowd so they would not attract attention. Purvis watched carefully from across the street. Inside the theater, Dillinger had no idea that dozens of federal agents were waiting for him. When the movie ended, people began leaving the building and filling the sidewalk. Then Purvis saw him. Dillinger stepped out of the theater with 2 companions. Purvis lit a cigar, which was the signal to the agents nearby. Within seconds, several agents approached Dillinger. Gunshots suddenly echoed through the street. Dillinger tried to run, but he collapsed on the sidewalk. The most famous criminal in America was dead. Overnight, Melvin Purvis became a national hero. After the death of John Dillinger, the name Melvin Purvis spread across the entire country. Newspapers praised him as the man who finally stopped America's most notorious gangster. His photograph appeared in magazines and newspapers from coast to coast. Many Americans saw him as a symbol of justice during a difficult time in the nation's history. But inside the FBI, his rising fame created tension. The powerful director of the Bureau was J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover believed the FBI as an organization should receive the credit for major victories. He did not like the idea of one agent becoming more famous than the agency itself. As Purvis continued to appear in newspapers and radio programs, Hoover became increasingly uncomfortable with his popularity. The relationship between the two men slowly became strained, and this conflict would eventually shape the future of Melvin Purvis's career. Even after Dillinger's death, the battle against violent gangsters continued. One of the most dangerous criminals still on the run was Babyface Nelson. Despite his nickname, he was extremely violent and unpredictable. Nelson had already killed several law enforcement officers and had no hesitation about opening fire during confrontations. Melvin Purvis and his team continued tracking members of Dillinger's former gang and their associates. In November 1934, FBI agents finally encountered Babyface Nelson in Illinois. What followed was a brutal gun battle along a rural highway. Bullets ripped through the air as both sides exchanged heavy fire. When the shooting stopped, Nelson was mortally wounded. However, the confrontation came with a tragic cost. 2 FBI agents had been killed during the battle. The era of gangster violence was slowly coming to an end, but it had claimed many lives along the way. Despite his success, Melvin Purvis was facing growing tension inside the FBI. Director J. Edgar Hoover was extremely protective of the Bureau's public image. He believed the organization itself should always remain the focus of attention. But Purvis had become one of the most famous lawmen in America. Newspapers continued to praise his role in capturing or killing major gangsters. Radio programs invited him to speak about crime fighting. Hollywood even showed interest in his story. This level of personal fame was something Hoover did not appreciate. Over time, Purvis found his influence within the Bureau becoming smaller. Decisions were taken away from him, and his role gradually diminished. In 1935, only 1 year after the Dillinger case, Melvin Purvis resigned from the FBI. The agent who had helped bring down the country's most feared criminals suddenly found himself outside the organization he had served. After leaving the FBI, Melvin Purvis entered a very different chapter of his life. Although he was no longer a federal agent, his reputation remained strong across the country. Purvis worked as a lawyer and businessman while occasionally speaking about his experiences during the gangster era. For a period of time, he even hosted a popular radio show where he described real stories about the fight against crime. Listeners were fascinated by the inside details of famous cases. Yet life outside the FBI was not always simple. Purvis had spent years chasing dangerous criminals and living under constant pressure. Adjusting to a quieter civilian life proved difficult. Still, many people continued to respect him as one of the key figures who helped defeat the violent crime wave of the 1930s. In 1960, a shocking event ended the life of Melvin Purvis. He died from a gunshot wound inside his home in Florence, South Carolina. Authorities officially ruled the death as suicide. However, the circumstances quickly raised questions among friends and family members. Some believed the shooting may have been an accident while Purvis was examining a firearm. Others were never fully convinced by the official explanation. Over the years, the exact truth has remained uncertain. What is known is that the man who once hunted the most dangerous gangsters in America died under mysterious circumstances. His story ended quietly, but the impact he left on American law enforcement remained significant.